provide the information and when you don't meet timeliness. So they are 100% funding that operation and letting the state do it in lieu of it. But I will take a look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, now you're going to take.
Senator Hammer, you're recognized.
We're paying. I think we're paying this lady close to $250,000.
With regards to how many each of you denied, you know those numbers right off the top of your head?
They're probably not going to know.
Exemptions for that matter.
Almost.
How many religious exemptions have we denied?
Yes, sir.
Well, we haven't implemented a COVID-19 vaccine mandate, so we haven't denied anybody. But I would say historically, if you look at influenza, other vaccines that we were required, to my knowledge, on my watch, we've never denied a single religious exemption.
Same thing for you, Director Gillespie. And just
we haven't implemented the policy yet.
okay. And Nate,
We have not had a policy in place.
but it is your intention to implement one. And I guess the question then would be, when the surveyors from CMS come in, based on what you just answered, do they actually look at those forms? And if they look at those forms and they say you should not have granted this religious exemption, are you subject to fine or corrective action?
It is my understanding that right now what we are being told is to look at the process, to ensure that there is a form, that there is a process, and that the process is followed, and that there is a form, but that the surveyor is not reviewing the form to determine whether or not the judgment that was made was the appropriate judgment.
Wow.
So it'll be totally upon each one of your institutions as to the latitude you use in order to grant the religious exemption or any other exemption option that is available.
And since we all know they're pro-vax,
I was going to say, within the law, there is an EEOC law that actually does come into play. So within the law, there is latitude. Yes, sir.
Okay. The second line of thought then is this: how many do you now currently not have vaccinated that you would be subject to lose as employees if they choose not to get vaccinated or to exercise the exemption option?
Jan Morgan's here live.
How many do each one of you stand to lose?
UAMS has approximately 2,000 employees who are not fully vaccinated.
All right.
We have 2 in North Little Rock and approximately 14 in Fayetteville.
Okay. Director Gillespie.
And of course, I'm not going to have my numbers right here in front of me because we are increasing almost daily on hours. We have barely been making.
Here, let me show you Jan Morgan's. I put my post on there, and I'm going to put hers onto mine
Right now,
because she'll have some comments on this. She's actually there. She's one of the few people that are running for office that actually gets involved in these fights.
If I did that, somebody would hand it to me.
And I know that Heath Loftus has been there before.
So right now where we sit is, I can run through the facilities very fast. Arkadelphia is currently at 82%. Conway is at 77%. Jonesboro is at 89%. Warren is at 85%. Boonville is at 66%. And it's one of our smaller facilities. And then
Hi, Rock City Gentler. Here, I'll put Jan's live stream on here.
Ashes at 82, I remember them. And, Ashes at 88, and the health center's at 82%.
Okay. Thank you. You did good, giving a good snapshot. So then my question to you is, by this time, I think that probably those that were going to be vaccinated would have been vaccinated. A percentage of these will probably continue. But what is your plan to deal with the labor shortage that each one of you are going to experience, short of coming back to us and asking us for money? And even if you had money, you can't make 2,000 people show up to work. So Dr. Patterson, I'm going to ask you what's your plan for finding 2,000 people if you have to let them all go?
Senator Hammer, I think that's an excellent question. I don't think that the number of people that we are going to lose is going to be 2,000. I think it's going to be much closer to 0, which is our historical response to the annual vaccine mandate that we have for influenza. If you look across the country, at other hospitals that have implemented mandates, or if you look across Arkansas at other hospitals that have implemented mandates, the number of employees who elect not to invoke an exemption is very, very small. And I think that the UAMS policy for exemption is broad enough that everybody, every one of those 2,000 who don't want to get a vaccine, will be able to drive through that our guidance for getting an exemption very easily.
Last question. Do you have natural immunity as an option? Is that provided to you by CMS as an option? Because we do have a state law that allows that. Or is that available to employees to utilize natural immunity if they produce evidence to show that? It seemed like I remember CMS made a statement also that said that was allowable. So is that in your policy? Thank you.
If someone has a deeply held belief that natural immunity precludes their need for getting a vaccine, then that is completely consistent with CMS guidance and also the EEOC.
Natural immunity isn't a belief.
So they could use it. Thank you.
Senator Hendren, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, so a couple questions based on what we've heard and what you all have testified so far. So I think the first thing is basically what I'm hearing is an encouragement to call their bluff, play chicken with the feds, and I guess what I want to know is what are the stakes. So would the three of you just say, if we do that, if we follow the advice of some and just say we don't care what the feds say, and they are serious about it, how many dollars would each of your agencies have at risk?
It's not playing chicken with the Fed. It's the fact that you can't do it because we have a state law.
21, that was approximately
Just like if the Fed said that we're going to reinstitute slavery.
To close a home or lay off staff or what?
it would not
See, Jim Hendren is a Democrat and a liar and trying to portray how this is actually being done.
but the federal VA has supplemented both homes, one at about 800,000.
You can't even understand the guy.
1.2. We've operated another 6 months.
So 6 months. Okay.
We range over the last few years between 135 million federal funds towards our facilities to 120, 114 million. It's a significant number every year. We would not be able to run our facilities without that money. They are funded through
So
VA.
over 100 million for DHS. And Dr. Patterson?
Yes, sir. We get about $600 million a year from CMS for reimbursement for clinical services, and north of $100 million a year from the National Institutes of Health for research contracts. So our research programs would all go away, and we would not be able to support clinical services.
So over 600 million?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we're talking roughly $750 million that we're encouraging you all to play chicken with the feds, basically, if we refuse to comply. The other issues that has been brought up as well, we just won't provide the data. And, you know, we faced this over the years in other industries. I know, for instance, in my industry that we have a state ADEQ, and there's been time after time where the feds have said, if you don't comply with this, the EPA will. And as business community, we would far rather work with the ADEQ industry than we would with the EPA. Are we putting ourselves in a similar situation here if we refuse to comply with their requirements with record keeping and surveying, that then they will say, okay, then we will come and comply for you?
Yes, sir. If we don't do it, they will do it. They do have surveyors they can send in.
So basically, yes, then the feds would come, and rather than having state regulatory authority over the three groups that we see here that have over $750 million, the feds would likely come and assume that control and regulatory authority, and also potentially cut off the funding.
And we actually oversee all of the. It's far more than just these facilities. We, as the state, oversee. Like I said, all of the nursing homes. In the state.
Rock City Tumblers on YouTube.
We oversee
Several
all
other
facilities
states are having to deal with this issue.
And the final question
course,
is, I heard
Florida
the
was
question
mentioned.
Comment that they're still under litigation.
Florida
I
is
always
refusing
hesitate
any
to
kind
try
of
to be a lawyer, but my understanding is the Supreme Court ruled on
most COVID mandates.
I don't think it gets much higher than the Supreme Court with regard regard to litigation, didn't they make it clear that the feds have the right to do what they are doing?
They did. They said the feds have the right to implement this mandate while the court case continues through the normal legal proceedings, which of course will take quite some time. So the Supreme Court did not, we were operating with the courts having blocked.
If this had been the 1800s, Jim Henry would be arguing we should
But now
maintain
it's unblocked.
slavery because the
Now
court
it's
said
unblocked.
so.
Right. Thank you.
Senator Clark, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know this doesn't fall under y'all's purview, but isn't medical marijuana against federal law?
Yep.
Are we afraid of them coming in and shutting us down? I haven't heard our various agencies worried about that involved in that. I'll move on.
They won't answer that one.
How many COVID vaccinations has UAMS given over the last year?
About 120,000.
How many vaccine injuries have been reported to VAERS over that same period?
I don't know the number.
Don't know. They never know.
We've had 0 patients who've been admitted to UAMS for complications of the vaccine and 0 patients who have died from complications of the vaccine.
Interesting. How many cases of myocarditis, pericarditis, thrombocytopenia, I'm sure I'm not saying that right, have occurred over the last year?
At UAMS?
Yes.
I'm not sure of the number of that. Most of the rare cases of myocarditis that have been reported have been in teens, so they would have been at Arkansas Children's Hospital.
So you don't know of any?
We've not had any that have been admitted to the hospital.
Do you know of any that were reported to VAERS?
I don't know the answer to that.
They don't know because they don't
for
care.
identifying and reporting vaccine injuries?
I'd actually prefer to defer that to Dr. Krause, who's here, if you want an answer to that, because I don't know the exact mechanism that we follow to do
You're
that.
pushing this and you don't
Dr. Krause
even
could answer
know.
that if you wanted an answer.
Love to have an answer when the chair thinks it's the proper time.
We can do that online or offline, however you want to do it.
I think you guys can connect offline and be fine.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Stubblefield, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Patterson, what are you doing for your current employees now that have worked through this COVID pandemic to keep them from leaving?
What have we done? We've done an awful lot. We have used some of our federal funds that we've received to give bonuses to our employees. We are providing them with behavioral health services to get through the stress that they face. We're doing everything that we can not to overwork our employees, which is a challenge because the demand for our services exceeds our ability to provide them. We value our employees. We're proud of the fact that we are the #1 employer in the state of Arkansas, and we intend to
You don't care.
make sure that our employees continue to feel that UAMS is the best place to work in the state.
BS. They don't care.
Can you explain to me how you can give one religious exemption and not grant another?
That's a good question.
I'm not aware that we've never not granted a religious
I know,
exemption.
but do you know if you can give one religious exemption, wouldn't that make it where you'd have to give everyone a religious exemption that applies for one?
The EEOC guidance in our policy is very broad. There's no reason why one religious exemption would preclude us from providing a different religious exemption.
And are you saying now that no one at UAMS has applied for a religious exemption?
We have 400 religious exemption applications pending, but because we don't have a mandate, we've not processed those exemptions.
They're going to deny it.
We process exemptions for influenza.
They're going to find excuses to deny it, and it'll just be random.
Varying religious exemptions, and at least on my watch, none of those exemptions have been denied.
I have one final question. Dr. Pastor, do you know the definition of blue flu?
The definition of what?
Blue flu? You ever
I'm
heard
not
that
sure.
word?
I'm not sure what you're referring to, sir.
That is a term that a staff uses when a lot of them are going to call in sick and not even show up. I was at UAMS about a month ago, and there were several that came to me and talked to me about participating in what they called a blue flu. And I said, what's a blue flu? And they said that's where we just don't show up for work. So I think it might be a good idea to ask around at UAMS and see what's going on as far as these staff that have apparently from what they told me, they
Good
haven't
point,
received
Val.
a raise in a
If everyone's
long
getting
time,
vaccine, who the hell's in the hospital?
compared to the high prices that we're paying for traveling nurses.
Oh, the differential between our employed
Yeah, it
nurses
does sound a little
and
bit like Bush.
traveling nurses is substantial right now, and that's an issue
Correct.
that impacts not just UAMS, it impacts every hospital in our state, and it causes us all challenges with staffing.
Wouldn't you think that would be a good reason to do everything within the realm of possibility to keep these nurses?
Yes, and keeping nurses includes continuing to have CMS funding so that we can support their salaries.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Payton, you recognize for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know you haven't made the rule. You're asking for approval to create the policy. Would this policy include a termination of the policy if and when the federal courts decide that it's unconstitutional?
That should be yes or no.
I can answer that on our part, yes.
I'd like to have answers from the other two, please.
We at the Arkansas Department of Veterans Affairs, our assessment is the Department of Human Services has the knowledge and the expertise. We have been coordinated very closely with them, and we would seek their counsel in that.
Wow.
Okay, Mr. Patterson.
That's not something that we consider, but there's no reason why that can't be done.
Well, so there's things that are unconstitutional for the federal government to do that a state can do. And I would like to know, I'd like assurances from the three of you that if we approve,
But I don't trust the. I don't trust the
in
first.
the policy
Yes.
itself, you would incorporate a termination of the policy when the federal courts determine that the federal government it cannot constitutionally create this mandate. So I would definitely want to see that in the policy if it's approved for you to go forward. So is this threat of sanctions against existing funding or new money that's coming in?
It's always new money in that every day we're getting paid. So the threat of sanction is against our regular funding flow that's coming in. This is how we're all operating. We were giving you our funding that was paid to us over the previous years, but every year it looks.
So even though there's a pandemic, you're just budgeting the same
I just
way,
want to be really clear,
including salaries and everything else.
This is the Biden administration telling us that they will not fund a patient's medical care if we don't come into compliance on the vaccine mandate. Is that correct?
It is correct that it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
The simple answer is just to say yes.
So, well, and you know, it may be cliche, but kicking grandma out of the nursing home has been threatened before, or at least they've tried to imply that was the threat. And this seems like it's really the threat. In other words, you would have to stop treating those patients, or stop treating, or shut down completely and stop.
That's the way they should have been doing it.
But in other words, if the federal government is going to sanction our healthcare industry for not being in compliance, that sanction would only be on the federally funded patients. Would we still be able to continue to take care of other patients?
depending on the funding that a facility had, potentially, yes. Recognize that they're doing this under authority that they have around our facilities' participation in Medicaid and Medicare. So while there are various steps along the way, at the end of the day, as you said, the ultimate penalty is to be removed as a Medicaid or Medicare provider, at which point the way that works is you are no longer in that program. You can no longer file claims and serve Medicaid or Medicare patients.
Okay, well, I had
which
that
is
pretty straight in my mind.
funding.
So I
They are
think
killing
pragmatically
people
speaking,
and forcing them to
we
take
all
the vaccine.
recognize that our
That's what they're
state
doing.
budget and our
But these cowards don't want to do that.
currently dependent on federal funding. I would encourage you to look for ways to break that dependence and become more independent. We may have to today knuckle under, but in the future, we don't know what other rights or freedoms may be threatened through the strings attached to this funding. So I'd like to try to keep that clear in our heads. And I definitely want to see in the policy, if this is approved today, a termination of the policy when the federal government is no longer in a position to demand it. I don't want to see the state doing it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I was going through my work emails, and as a provider, I get updates from CMS daily. It looks like just issued an email that they've issued the final dates, and the 30-day compliance date looks like it's going to be February 22nd. I'd love for y'all to correct me where I'm wrong. And the 60-day compliance date is March 21st. Can you explain, is that the first shot has to be taken on the 22nd? The second shot would have to be taken in March? Or what does the 30 and 60-day mean?
So for the chair,
And
this is mainly for video.
Email.
Yeah,
It just came.
Okay.
We all know they're going to
I'll
change
pick up my
it.
phone. I haven't seen that one. The dates we were working with yesterday were February 14th and March 14th. So it sounds that it slipped a week.
It has moved
Okay.
a week. It says Texas had an objection to the dates, and these are the new dates that were issued.
Okay. So if those are the new dates, then yes, it's your employees are.
How does
supposed
she
to
not
have
know
been
that?
shot by that first date.
Or their exemption.
You're our state
their
health
exemption
czar. You're
in
supposed to
place.
know this
And
stuff.
then the second shot, or the second shot, or an exemption by that second date. If you're only doing Johnson & Johnson, the one shot, employees would try to get that by that first date, is the way they have it written.
Thank you. My point in pointing that out is we're less than 30 days away from that first date already.
That's why we have been and are continuing to hold clinics at our facilities on a weekly basis. We are seeing employees moving to get first shots. So that's really positive. We are seeing more beginning to do that, and moving then on to the second shot. But it is also why we would like to be able to get the exemption process out very, very quickly. If approved, our plan is to implement that on Monday. Finalize a policy, put it out, and begin taking exemptions Monday.
And also, I'd like to point out to the committee, as a provider, we received a letter earlier this week from CMS that we would have to have all of our shot records / exemptions in the personnel files upon a site visit, and they are out doing site visits now from CMS, looking at those personnel files of providers across the state. So with that, I'll go to Representative Kavanaugh, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, let me just thank you all for being here. I think you're doing the best you can do to answer questions, even though it might put you on the hot seat a little bit. I'm almost 63 years old, and I don't like to be threatened. I don't like to be bullied. I don't like mandates, period. I believe in personal responsibility and personal right to choose whether or not to take a vaccine, wear a mask, whatever. And so I know you're in a place that's considered a rock and a hard place. I know that. But I want to go on record as being one that supports your medical teams, your medical staff, the employees to make their own personal choice. I've made my choice. I can live with it. But I get so many calls and emails from people telling me I've been a nurse or even some physicians for more than 20 years, been on the front line. And I've just seen too many problems with this vaccine, and I've chosen not to take it, but I'm getting ready to lose my job. Some of those were in a position financially to go start their own practice or separate from the hospitals and go out and work, but others are not. And I just want you all to know that I recognize the difficulty. I'm proud of you for being here in front of our legislators, but I object to forcing a mandate on the people of this great state. Thank
Amen.
you.
That was Brent Smith.
Members, I've gotten around
Who's
to
running
all
for
council
Congress.
members once.
It is sad that none of our federal
or
members of
statements,
Congress ever make any
or quick
statements on this
questions.
or don't seem to help on it.
Bentley, you're recognized for a very quick question.
Thank you. I am an alternate. Thank you, sir. What can you guys tell me, each of you, what accommodations will you make for these employees who are given a religious exemption? For example, just a couple specifics with that answer. Will you allow them to give direct patient care, and will they be required to take a weekly vaccine? Not a weekly vaccine, excuse me, a weekly test, a test for the COVID.
No,
Will
she
they
may be
required to
correct.
take
It
a
could
weekly
turn
test?
to
If
weekly.
So who will pay for that? And will they be allowed to give direct patient care? Because I know, I'm just looking back on some other industries, they gave an accommodation, but that accommodation was you're getting laid off for a year. So we want some specifics on what those accommodations are going to be for religious freedom. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what they
I can
do.
start. At this stage, what we're looking at in accommodations, obviously to be on a case-by-case basis, depending on what the person's situation is, because when you think about medical exemptions, for example, but the accommodations
That's
that are
ridiculous.
being looked at this stage are
Laid off for a year.
mask, the weekly
Denial of
testing.
benefits.
They will continue to provide. If you have an exemption, you can continue to provide direct patient care, and we do need these employees providing direct patient care. So they will not be laid off with an exemption, to be specific to your question.
Yeah, I would say the same thing for UAMS and Representative Bentley. I would also say that we provide testing, vaccines, et cetera, through our employee and student health service, and that's all free service for our employees. So it's not going to cost anybody anything.
Bentley, our first priority is the safety of those veterans and their families that are in our nursing homes. Some of them have comorbidities.
This dude's about to pass out from wearing his mask. Can you listen to him?
Safety of our staff members also. We have had testing and mask requirements in the nursing homes. We will continue those. And again, we will seek the counsel of the Department of Human Services as we go forward.
So we should just fire you and let them run it, since
One
you've said
quick
that 3
follow-up.
times now.
Just how many staff openings do all of you have right now that you're needing staff for? That's my final question.
I don't have the specific number in front of me, but as you know, we are very much down staff, so it would be in the hundreds.
Hey, folks, like, share, and comment on this.
Senator Johnson, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's Mark Johnson.
Dr. Patterson and possibly Secretary Gillespie, in response to a question from Senator Hendrick, to kind of put a number on this risk, I think he said almost $750 million, and I think you said 600,000. I'm trying to pin that actual number down. And again, I know these are estimates, but could you repeat that?
Yeah, so at UAMS, we receive about $600 million a year in reimbursement from CMS for services rendered. In addition, we have other federal contracts that are at risk based on this rule, including our National Institutes of Health funding, which is over $100 million share. That's basically the support for all of the research that gets done at UAMS.
Well, I'm just trying to get a number because I mean, you're asking us more or less to give up our constituents' First Amendment rights in return for a dollar amount to guarantee the programs that serve them. I just wanted to put a number on how much we had to risk to stand up to, or we have accepted to abrogate our constituents' First Amendment rights. I'm just trying to get a number. So
Yeah.
for the time being, we'll just use.
How much is the First
$600 million,
Amendment for sale
give or
for?
take a bit. So thank you for your candor. I don't envy your position, but I didn't raise my right hand and put my left hand on a Bible to pledge to support and defend CMS. I pledged it to defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution. of the State
How
of
much is
Arkansas.
the Constitution
Thank you.
worth?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That's what this boils down
Representative
to.
Ladyman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple questions. The first one pertains to what Senator Johnson was just talking about. If I add up the numbers that you all gave, it's $834 million that we would lose. And I understand the situation that we're in, but, you know, in my mind, the question comes, you know, what will we sell the state of Arkansas for? What will we sell our freedoms for? Would we do it for 400 million? You know, are we just bickering about price here? Because, I mean, this is a very difficult situation. But if you really believe that people should have the freedom to decide this, and I understand there's another side to this, to protecting the general health, but, you know, we're putting a dollar value on that. In my mind, that's wrong. So I'll ask you another question. On the federal monitors that would be coming in and looking at our facilities, will they be looking at the exemptions that you all allow? And will they be evaluating your decisions? In other words, could they reverse an exemption that you give? Is that something they might be doing?
As the guidance is coming down now, what the surveyors are to do is to look at the process to ensure that there is a policy in place, to look at the process and to ensure that the process was followed, that there is documentation in the file, but not to review that documentation and enact their own judgment. Is that helpful?
So your decision on whether to give the exemption or not would be the final decision. That's what you think at this point?
Yes, in terms of them looking at it, yes.
Okay. One other thing, and this was brought up earlier, but if we do lose CMS funding, then that would mean that even everybody would lose treatment, not just that area that is affected by the non-vaccinated.
Yes,
is that
sir.
true?
Yes. If I could, just to make it very specific, looking, for example, at our human development centers. This is the primary funding for the human development centers. And if that,
It's all about funding.
if the human
The hell with the
development centers
Constitution,
could
it's all
no
about
longer
funding, and that's all they care about.
patients,
Is the U.S.
as you know,
Constitution for
most
sale?
everyone in a human development center is a Medicaid patient. So it would mean
You're right, Val.
that they could no longer serve those patients. We could no longer pay for those centers.
It's not even safety.
The ramifications are quite enormous in the sense of losing the funding for the centers. We do not have alternate funding for the centers to pay the employees to run the facilities. For when the people in the centers receive medical treatment outside the center, they are going as Medicaid patients. So if a hospital could somehow survive the loss of Medicaid funding, they would not, if they saw that patient, they could not, there's no billing source to pay for that patient's care. So the ramifications are enormous. It is beyond just the loss of the money.
Okay.
I would just say there's no model that I can conceive of by which UAMS could continue to operate clinical services absent CMS funding.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I'd like to make one more statement on Don. I really cannot believe, I'll just take the Jonesboro Human Development Center, which I'm very familiar with. I cannot believe that the federal government would put 110 physically and mentally challenged people who some have no relatives on the street. I mean, what you're saying, I understand. This is not against you or your organization, but if you can't pay the employees to take care of those 110 people who can't feed themselves and move around, I can't believe our federal government would put 110 of those people out on the street with no support. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Beck, you recognize for a question or statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, I guess it's a simple yes or no answers. You don't give me any others, right? But to each one of you guys, getting the numbers that you shared with us, as far as like the number of religious exemptions that you have that have been filed, I'm curious as to why they're not being processed right now. Just so we'd have that work done, as opposed to waiting.
Because they don't want to give any answers.
But
They want to deny as many as possible. They want to get their power and then deny as many as possible.
Is there
That's
an appeal
why.
process within
That's why.
the religious exemption?
Give us the
process
power.
that you guys
Give us
set
the
up?
power, and then
And
we'll
if there is, will
and
you
trust
assure
us.
that if we allow this to go forward,
The time is
that each one of those
0:00
that you have right now
a.m.
that will be filed will be able to be processed, and the appeals process, if there are appeals for those, prior to these dates that the federal government is putting down now. I mean, I'm really concerned that someone could kind of get the last day before, say, well, your religious exemption is not, and then they don't have time to have an appeal.
That's exactly what they're doing.
Putting these people in a bad position.
It's all about timing and power.
The two questions are: do you have an appeal process within what you're setting up?
Let me see if I can try and do a
And will you tell us that
podcast.
everyone will have an opportunity to, if they want, to file a religious exemption and have their appeal process if that happens from each one. Thank you.
Yeah, so I can speak to that. We do have an appeal process. That appeal process is an appeal to me personally. And I already made a commitment that if I deny a religious exemption of a UAMS employee, that I will notify the chairs of this committee. I don't foresee that happening. It's never happened with our other vaccine mandates. I think the more important issue, though, and this is a real concern, is if somebody incorrectly fills out a form or doesn't fill it out completely. And the remedy process, I think, is even more important than the appeal process. And so we are committed to remedying any defective applications so that the defective application does not lead to a denial of an appropriate exemption.
And we will also have an appeals process. And to the point you were making about timing, if we are able to go forward with this on Monday and start receiving exemptions, we are going to make sure that we are able to process them. If for some reason someone, and as he said, we will be working with people, if someone fills the form out incorrectly, incompletely, does something that would, rather than just deny, we will be working with them to try to help them.
No, you won't.
An
No, you
appropriate
won't.
appeal, an appropriate.
Be just like the
exemption request,
DMV
if
or
that's what
anything
they're
else.
trying
They're
to
going to
say.
deny and
But
delay
if
as
you
much
had
as
that
possible.
situation, as you
And
said,
they know
that
it.
someone, for
The whole
some
world
reason,
knows it.
everything went through, and the day before it came out, they can file an appeal while someone's exemption request is awaiting consideration, or while their appeal is awaiting consideration. They'll be given automatically an accommodation, right? So they will not be.
They'll be laid off for a
going
year.
To the you have not met it bucket. So we're very aware of that.
We
around
already
the
know they
deadlines.
abuse people that don't take the jab.
Reverend Beck, we will work with our staff members to accommodate them. My experience that in writing policies, you could never cover 100% of the circumstances. There's a human factor. And in the Arkansas Department of Veterans Affairs, we value our staff members. And I will take every consideration under consideration.
Oops.
So members, here's where we're at. We've got quite a few directors and secretaries that need to get out at a certain time. Peer agenda is what's holding them. We have roughly 10 more in the queue. I can process through these 10, but we need to get moving before 10:15, 10:20 so I can get to the peer agenda so I can get these folks on to where they have to be. So if you want to say your statement, we're asking a lot of repetitive questions. Say your statement.
Well, notice how this happened. Notice how convenient this is.
With that, Representative Meeks, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So they schedule us on a day when all these bureaucrats
What I'm
just
about
happen to
to
be
ask
busy.
may seem controversial on the surface, but I wonder how much of this discussion is almost superfluous. And what I mean by that is this: you have a high percentage of your employees that are already vaccinated. Pretty much everybody else is going to seek and get a religious exemption. So that should leave little to no employees who would be in violation of any mandate. So yes, no?
Yes, our goal is 0. And I'm highly confident that we will reach that goal.
And our goal is also 0. Very well said.
So by the time we get everyone vaccinated who wants to get vaccinated, everybody else gets their religious exemption, then the rest of this discussion almost becomes I don't want to say meaningless, but superfluous. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
But that won't happen because they will deny people. We all know they're going to deny
Mr.
people.
Chair, I just want to.
They've already denied people over
restate what I
masks.
thought I heard Dr. Patterson say. I'm over here, and you're right there. So the religious exemption that you're going for, I mean, obviously you don't want to lose a single employee. None of you do. But what I believe I heard you say was the deeply held religious belief. If someone believes that they have natural immunity, that would qualify for the religious exemption. Is that what I kind of understood you to say?
Yeah, if that's their basis for feeling that they have been conferred immunity, then we will.
So I'm trying to do a podcast.
EOC guidance on religious exemptions.
I've just now started this. I need to share this and get it a little
so
better.
that allows for that. So that's what I thought I heard you say, and I know each agency has their own policies, so I want to. My question is confirming from you, but also will the other two agencies at the table commit that is the same interpretation they have as far as granting religious exemptions, that natural immunity would qualify as a deeply held religious belief, or deeply held belief, I guess, for religious exemption?
Sorry, that one has not come up, so I'm actually looking at my chief counsel, okay? Because we are taking a very broad view of, because as he said, the EOC guidance is basically a strongly held, deeply held belief. It is not the word religious. Okay. And so our expectation has been that we would apply it in that way.
You're correct, Johnny. No more jabs.
Question whether or not someone's belief.
They have lunches to get to. You're right.
We would not be going.
You're right. They should have scheduled this on Saturday.
Whether or not they deeply.
So that not only people, so people could testify for and against this.
Planning to be very.
And these bureaucrats should be there for several hours having to answer questions on something this important.
Your mic's not on there.
Yeah.
Effectiveness and efficiency.
I'm talking to Rock City Tumblers on YouTube.
We will seek counsel from DHS. We don't have those expertise in the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Why is this guy here then? All you do is seek counsel. Leave.
Shadow.
We'll get rid of your position. We'll save the money that we're wasting on you, and we'll just have a federal official do your job since you obey them anyway.
Quick statement or a single question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cindy.
No, make them say.
Strictly about the patients that are going in the hospital.
let's just say that you have Medicare and Medicaid. Would this affect anyone going into the hospital that was on Medicare? Would they be required to do these things too, since it's a federal program?
Yes, sir. It is. This covers both Medicaid and the Medicare program.
Senator Ballinger, I'm gonna recognize you for a very quick question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Since you've already been recognized once.
Well, I appreciate that very much. So
again, they could have scheduled this another day, but they refused to do so.
Secretary Gillespie, I think you're really the appropriate person.
This is live stream.
That you would recognize that you know, as a legislative body, we've set policy, and the policy is to try to provide as much flexibility as possible to the individual to make a choice. And would you be willing to, the same way that you're coming in here and you're trying to work to and I get it, you are between a rock and a hard place. You're not in an easy spot, and I get it. But would you be willing to try to work the system also to push back a little bit on the federal government that doesn't have the same values or the same policy agenda that we have set in the state of Arkansas? So what I really would like to see is energy that's not into just complying, but energy into trying to find some way to make it where there is a balance. And your letter request to make a modification of the final rule, that's the type of thing. I want to see real energy and effort. Are you willing to commit to doing that?
We have. I appreciate you pointing out the letter that we did send CMS about the final rule, and we are continuing to talk to them about our concerns, and there is ongoing.
No, they don't care.
Activity between them and the states, and we are heavily engaged in that to try to make sure that we are able to, as you said, push.
They can't comply fast enough.
So we are doing that from all the positions that we can. We also supported, as you know, the Attorney General's office in their lawsuit. We did provide attestations that they needed to help to be able to give very particulars around Arkansas. And as that court case now moves through the traditional process, we will be supporting the AG's office in the other states as they continue in the courts around that. So we do not, in terms of the court side of this, we do not view it as over. And we plan to continue on that side, working very intensively with them around that piece. So I hope that conveys to you that while we are moving today with your permission to take this first step in action, we're doing it. I think you've seen all three of us really trying to ensure that we think about our employees as well as our patients.
They don't care one bit about their employees.
But also, as Representative Payton said, in our policy, it will be clear that if this IFR goes away, if this rule goes away, we immediately, this is over. This is being imposed only because of that.
Dr. Patterson, so
but they won't put that in the policy.
Right now,
why won't they put that in the policy?
2,000. So if you end up granting 2,000,
this is hearings of the Arkansas Legislature. Yes. COVID-19 mandates. Make them stay.
Senator Hammer, you're recognized for the same directions. Very quick. You've already been recognized once before.
Thank you for the latitude. The policies are under development as we speak. Is that correct? Just a head nod.
I should ask, well, how about we schedule this for another time?
I want to see everything that is allowable by CMS to every other population that is going to be applied to yours, including the immunity, but also the testing and everything else, because CMS has created a hole that you guys can drive a truck through.
Like comments on
and while it ought to be Joe Biden and his administration,
I'm still learning how to use this right now.
It's not at you, and you're sitting before a very conservative body that expects you to give every ounce of latitude in order to be able to accommodate what we want, including addressing the issue of undue or unreasonable hardship in the policy, and not use that as a clause to get out of granting the
of course they will. Rock City
Tumblers. Somebody is turned down.
They're gonna.
we have
At
access.
any moment, they could
to
say,
the
now you have to
reason
have
why
5
they're
jabs. Now you have to have
part of the
7.
personnel
Now you have to
file.
have 1 a week.
Part of their
And
personnel
testing.
file.
And you have to wear a
have
mask and
access
face
to.
shield. And we got to know your complete medical history. And as soon as they get that kind of power, they'll do it.
But if they give it to us, it's okay. All right. And so what I would just ask.
Senator, we're going a little long.
Yeah, well,
Can you
I
do
just
some
want
of
to say
this
thank
offline?
you and thanks.
And of course, they schedule this to minimize time.
Members seeing no further questions, without objection, this stands approved. Thank you, guys. So with that, we'll move on. I'm going to take the peer agenda out of order. So with that, I recognize Senator Dismay.
So was there a vote or what?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The peer subcommittee met on Tuesday, January 25th. The subcommittee received reports, reviewed requests, and approved the following items: various temporary appropriation increases, American Rescue Plan appropriation increases, and restricted reserve transfer, or fund transfer. I understand that there were questions from members on item G7.
So I'm not sure what just happened, if the whole thing was approved or not.
Answer those questions.
Members, there was items and requests for information and personnel. The actual items were in the peer agenda. So with that,
So I honestly don't know if there's a vote. Let me stop this
Senator Sullivan,
because they're talking about something else. Let me go to. Let me see if Jan Morgan's going to give a comment because she's there right now. So they had streams. They had comments.